All right, let's dive right in. We're going to tackle a question that, even 2 decades later, still feels pretty confusing. How on earth did the horrific 9/11 attacks, carried out by al-Qaeda, lead to a full-blown invasion of Iraq, a country that, had nothing to do with it? Today, we're going to connect the dots. We'll follow the trail from an idea to a tragic event and finally to a war.
So this is the big puzzle we're going to try and piece together. And the connection isn't obvious because, well, on the surface, there really isn't one. To get it, we have to look past the smoke and the headlines of 9/11 and dig into an intellectual movement that was already in place, just kind of waiting in the wings for its moment.
Just look at this timeline. There's a full 18 months between these two huge events. And what our sources suggest is that what happened in that year and a half wasn't just a spontaneous reaction to an attack. It was more like the execution of a plan that had been sitting on a shelf for a while.
To really understand the road to Iraq, we actually have to rewind the clock. We're going back before 9/11, even before George W. Bush was elected president. Our story starts with a small but very influential group of people and this one powerful idea they all shared.
Okay, so picture this. It's the late 90s, and his new think tank pops up in Washington, D.C. It's called the Project for the New American Century, or PNAC for short. Now, on paper, its mission sounds pretty straightforward: promote American global leadership. But what that actually meant was a really radical new vision for how the U.S. should use its power around the world.
And here's where it gets really interesting. PNAC wasn't just some obscure group of academics writing papers nobody read. As our sources put it, this was basically a government in waiting. I mean, just look at the names on this list: Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz. When George W. Bush won the election in 2000, these guys flowed directly from this think tank right into the top national security jobs in the country. They walked into the White House as a team, already on the same page.
And the thing is, these guys didn't just show up with some vague ideas about foreign policy. Nope. They came to Washington with a detailed plan, a blueprint, that had already been written and published a year before the 2000 election. It laid out exactly what they wanted to do.
This document right here, Rebuilding America's Defenses. This is the key. You could almost call it the Rosetta Stone for what came next. It was published in September of 2000, and it basically argued that the U.S. had wasted its unipolar moment after the Cold War, and that it needed to aggressively assert its military dominance everywhere on the planet.
So what was the endgame here? Well, they called it a global Pax Americana, basically a world peace kept in order by the United States. And how would they achieve this? Through military power so overwhelming, so unquestioned, that no other country could even dream of becoming a rival. The goal wasn't just to win wars, it was to make sure no one else could even start one.
To pull this off, the report laid out 4 core missions, and this went way beyond simple defense. It called for a military that could fight and win multiple major wars at the same time. And get this, it also said the military should perform constabulary duties, which is basically a fancy way of saying acting like a global police force to shape events in America's favor. This whole thing was a justification for a huge, permanently interventionist military.
And here's a detail that really shows how long-term they were thinking. The report said dominance on land, sea, and air wasn't enough. The U.S. also had to control space. It literally called for the creation of U.S. Space Forces, almost 20 years before the U.S. Space Force actually became a real thing.
Okay, so let's just recap for a second. The people are in place, the plan is written down. But the authors of this report, they were realists. They knew that trying to make such a radical change happen in peacetime was going to be a long, hard political slog. They needed something to shake up the system.
And that brings us to this single sentence buried deep on page 51 of their report. It's a line that would become, well, infamous. It's basically them admitting that to get the country on board with this massive project, it would probably take a huge crisis, some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor.
And then, almost exactly 1 year to the day after that report was published, it happened. September 11th, 2001. The catastrophic and catalyzing event that they had written about in the abstract suddenly became a horrific, devastating reality. The political gridlock they worried about, it was shattered in an instant.
So you can imagine, in the aftermath of 9/11, people rediscovered this one sentence and it just exploded. 2 totally different interpretations emerged. On one hand, maybe it was just a cynical but realistic observation about how politics works, right? Or, as critics and conspiracy theorists argued, was it something more? Was it a Freudian slip, a statement of intent, evidence that they were looking for an excuse to put their plans in motion. The sources lay out both sides, and honestly, people are still debating what it meant.
So, with the world completely turned upside down after 9/11, that think tank blueprint, it started moving from paper to policy at lightning speed.
And I mean, the speed is just staggering. According to reports, the very next day, on September 12th, key PNAC members inside the administration were already pushing to go after Iraq. And then just 9 days later, PNAC itself sends a public letter to President Bush pushing for the removal of Saddam Hussein, and they made it crystal clear that this should happen even if evidence does not link Iraq to the attacks.
And then, a year later, it all becomes official. In September 2002, the Bush administration releases its formal national security strategy. This paper, which everyone started calling the Bush Doctrine, wasn't just influenced by PNAC. It was basically the PNAC blueprint, reborn as the grand strategy of the United States of America.
And this was a huge deal, a total game changer. The Bush Doctrine officially embraced the idea of preemptive war, meaning the U.S. would strike at threats before they could even fully form. It said the U.S. had the right to act alone, unilaterally, with coalitions of the willing, instead of going through the UN. These were the core ideas from the PNAC playbook, now the official foreign policy of the world's only superpower.
So the project for the new American century itself eventually fades away. It officially shuts its doors in 2006. But the ideas it pushed and the war it so successfully argued for, well, they've left a long, really complicated legacy that we are all still living with today. The main public reason for the war, the thing that was repeated over and over, that Saddam Hussein had an active weapons of mass destruction program, that turned out to be false. No WMDs were ever found. And because of that, the war is now widely seen as a massive strategic blunder that helped destabilize the entire Middle East for a generation.
But according to our sources, the legacy is even deeper than just the war itself. PNAC's ideas shifted what's called the Overton window. That's basically the range of ideas the public is willing to consider and accept. Things like preventative war and aggressive unilateralism, which were once considered pretty radical, fringe ideas, they became normalized. They became part of the mainstream foreign policy debate, and that has stuck around long after the architects of the policy left office.
Which leaves us with this final big question. Was the PNAC blueprint just a lucky prediction of what was going to happen? Or was it more of a self-fulfilling prophecy? Did a powerful idea simply meet its tragic moment? Or did the people who believed in that idea, once they got into power, help make sure that moment arrived? It's a central puzzle of this whole story, and definitely one worth thinking about. Thanks for joining this explainer.